welcome everyone to the Long COVID and Physical Activity Rehabilitation webinar. My name is Will Slemmings. I've got the honour of introducing today's webinar. I'm the Strategic Lead for Health at the Heart Sport and Physical Activity Partnership. We're being joined by lots of different partners today, which we'll introduce as we go through. However, before we get to that, as long as I can skip on, a little bit of webinar housekeeping. So just to let you know, we're using the Zoom webinar function today, which means that all participants will remain muted and with the cameras off throughout the webinar. So you are safe. We can't see or hear you. We advise using the speaker view for your best viewing experience. You can see the image on the right there of how to do that. It should be at the top right of your screen. And then we also welcome all comments and network. There's lots of things coming, lots of people introducing themselves in the chat already, which is fantastic. Please still do that, introduce yourselves and where you're coming from. And before you send, make sure you click everyone. Otherwise, it'll only be myself and my colleagues that can see, and we want everyone to be able to see all the things that you're writing. If you have any specific questions for the presenters today, because we're covering a really interesting topic and they are the subject experts, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, we might lose them in the chat. The Q&A will hold the questions specifically in, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to everyone registered for the event. And the final thing, we'll remind you at the end, but there'll be a pop-up feedback survey when you leave the webinar. Please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in, because it'll help guide future content and let us know what you thought of the event. So, moving on to the agenda, we're going to kick off in a minute with some specifics around long COVID and techniques for managing long COVID. That's from colleagues from the Central London Community Healthcare NHS Trust. We're then going to hear specifically about the long COVID service in West Hertfordshire, again from the Central London Community Healthcare NHS Trust colleagues. And we'll move on to talk a little bit about the long COVID and physical activity project. And that's an update from ourselves as Heart Sport and Physical Activity Partnership. And then hopefully we'll get time at the end to pop those questions in for any of the presenters. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over and invite David Murnane, who's the clinical lead for the long COVID service at the Central London Community Healthcare NHS Trust, who's going to take us through the first section of the webinar.
Thank you for the introduction, Will. Yes, thank you for everyone attending today. I'm David. I'm the clinical lead for the long COVID service based in West Hertfordshire, delivering the long COVID and assessment service to patients on behalf of Central London Community Healthcare Trust. So next slide, please. So hopefully as part of today's session, we will be covering these aims sort of outlined here. So an introduction to our service and including who we are and what we offer as part of our service within the NHS, and to offer hopefully an increased overall awareness of long COVID out in society and in the community. I've got a couple of colleagues and clinicians with me today as part of our MDT who will deliver different aspects of increasing awareness of basic principles, how to manage specific symptoms associated with long COVID, and then partly formed with Heart Sports Partnership here is discuss these exercise outcomes we've been having with long COVID patients that we've developed over the last 12 months. So next slide, please. So signs and symptoms that develop during or after infection consisting of long COVID continue for a 12-week period or more. You've probably heard this explanation quite a lot as it's existed since 2021, in line with what their explanation for these continuous symptoms that patients are suffering following infection of COVID. This is what's defined as long COVID. It is a multi-system condition with a range of debilitating symptoms. Signs and symptoms continue or develop after an acute infection. What we're finding now with a lot of patient groups is there's not as much testing anymore, but people are still developing these long-standing symptoms and need help and support in recovering and managing these symptoms in the short and long term. Next slide, please. So research suggests that between 1 month and a year after having COVID, 1 in 5 people between the age of 18 and 64 have at least one medical condition that might be due to COVID-19. Obviously, that impacts a large amount of population, and currently around 2 million people are reported to have long COVID in society, with less than 40% of those actually having support network in place to help manage their condition. Among the aged people of 65 and older, at least 1 in 4 of these has one medical issue that might be due to long COVID. So you see, as people get older, they are more at risk, which leads me nicely on to the next slide. So those most at risk, obviously, if you had a severe illness with COVID-19, and this is going back to right to the start and in the height of the pandemic, especially if you're hospitalized or needed intensive care treatment, you are more at higher risk of developing long-standing long COVID disorder. Your certain medical condition make you more predisposed to a deconditioned state, which makes the symptoms and management of long COVID more severe and a longer recovery rate in your overall management. You have a condition affecting different organs, specifically the heart and lungs, or multi-system inflammatory systems while sick with COVID or afterwards. However, anyone who gets COVID-19 can have long-term effects, including people with no symptoms or mild symptoms, even with COVID-19. Within our service here in West Herts, our age range has been as young as 17 and as old as in the 90s. So there is really no specific age demographic to who this affects. There is a higher prevalence in females. That a lot of research has said that through national statistics, and people living in deprived areas. Those working in social and healthcare have been impacted a lot, and those with activity limiting health condition or disability. Next slide, please. So our team. So we were first established in 2021 with a very, very small team. It first started as a signposting-based service with just a nurse and admin as base supporters. There was no awareness of how to manage these patients, how to manage this condition. Since then, the team's developed quite significantly, and in 2024, as we speak, we've got a significant establishment forming a multidisciplinary team consisting of myself as the clinical lead, a GP within the service, specialist nurse, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, speech and language therapist, clinical psychologist, clinical exercise physiologist, rehabilitation assistant, and administrator. And I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So overall, we are a holistic service, often receiving patients quite late on in their long-term management of their long COVID condition. A large majority of our rehabilitation focuses on listening to their stories and validating their symptoms to begin with, almost getting that acceptance from someone at the front door. As many people have been told, there is no explanations for these symptoms, and it takes them a long time to get access to our specific services. So in terms of specific AHP or allied health professional roles within the service, we have a speech and language therapist who you'll meet on the call today. She focuses very much on speech, language, communication and swallowing with these patients, and also our brain fog specialist within the team. We have a physiotherapist who focus on breathing pattern and cough assessments, exercise prescription, and workplace ergonomic advice and specific diagnosis of POTS. OTs within the service, fatigue being one of the major symptoms associated with long COVID. They provide a lot of specialist management advice and vocational rehab about returning to work or work-based patterns and routine advice for that continued recovery and return to a workplace environment. We have a specialist nurse who focuses on the clinical-based assessment of patients referred into the service and observations and medication review, as well as diet and nutrition support as part of her provision. We have a clinical psychologist for that one-to-one psychological advice and support, and have a wide variety of psychological and mental health conditions associated with the long-term management of long COVID. And finally, exercise physiologist as part of our team provides one-to-one exercise prescription and also a face-to-face group-based exercise assessment and group-based exercise sessions, which I'll come on to a little bit later. Next slide, please. So this is a general sort of overview of our pathway, and it continues to evolve as we move forward. But the referral into our service is followed by an initial telephone screen with a patient, again achieving that patient story and projecting what sort of input they require based on their symptoms and presentation. At this first point, the service, along with a lot of other services throughout NHS England, developed independent long COVID resource books to provide specific advice for this population. Up until now, we've been using a Living With app, which is an online resource to use and to access different online learning materials. Within the service, we deliver an online self-management education program. And again, this is delivered by different members of our multidisciplinary team. While all this is happening, there's different offers of face-to-face clinic appointment based both in Hemel Hempstead and Elstree Way Clinic in Boreham Wood. And this provides specialist one-to-one review and treatment, either with our respiratory physiotherapist, speech and language therapist, psychologist, nurse, or occupational therapist. As part of a physical-based intervention, we deliver a face-to-face exercise assessment, as previously mentioned, and a rehabilitation exercise program. As well as the other group-based therapies we provide of cognitive neurorehabilitation and our mindfulness and relaxation group, really pulling on those skills within the MDT and that specialist treatment with positive outcomes for patients in recovery. Following on and typically towards discharge and also during time on the service, we have close links with talking therapies or improving access to psychological therapy services across Hertfordshire. We have advice and guidance via our in-service GP, but also your own primary care GP out in the community, and also signposting to specialist services for intervention, i.e. in Hertfordshire, the dietetics service and the specialist respiratory services. Next slide, please. So what are the symptoms? Obviously, those top three that everyone speaks about associated with long COVID: fatigue, brain fog, and breathlessness, but it can impact any part of the body. We've had a wide variety of symptoms ranging from anything from hair loss to dizziness to chest pain and pins and needle-like sensation. Honestly, the symptoms are endless in the presentation with these patients. Symptoms can, as I said, be really wide-ranging and present differently as an individual person to person. Patients are reporting some abnormal symptoms and not necessarily listed, even in this non-exhaustive list here, but it doesn't mean they aren't there. And that acceptance and that support that's provided by the service is really, really important. Symptoms can fluctuate. We refer to them as sort of exacerbations of your management of your condition. And there's no real pattern to this either. It tends to happen quite sporadically or a change in routine. So this is where that all-round input overall health management comes in to help support further as part of the specialist within the MDT. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to pass you over to Leah, our speech and language therapist within the service, who's just going to go over some professional guidance in line with different symptoms related to long COVID.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. So moving on then to some basic management principles and advice, starting with fatigue management. So like David said, this is one of the most common symptoms of long COVID, and it can have a really significant impact on people's quality of life. So firstly, we would recommend to avoid pushing through the fatigue. We see that this often leads to a worsening in symptoms. This is referred to as the boom and bust cycle, which is explained here in this graphic. To help reduce these crashes or busts, we would encourage 3 principles, which you may have heard of before. So pacing, planning, and prioritizing your activities. Keeping to a routine and planning your activities can be helpful with this, but it's also really important to take regular breaks during these activities. This can help to top up the energy and reduce the severity of a bust. So what we're trying to do is avoid these large peaks and troughs in your fatigue and aiming for a bit more stability in the symptoms. You could also think about monitoring your energy with a fatigue diary. So perhaps rating your energy out of 10. This information might help you to identify any behaviors or patterns that are impacting on your fatigue. For example, maybe every time you do a certain activity, you notice that you feel a bit worse the next day. Perhaps adjusting or amending this might help. Maybe that's shortening the activity or adding in a few extra rest breaks. Having good nutrition and hydration is also really important. Remembering that food is fuel. And trying to reduce stress and anxiety when you can, as this can exacerbate the symptoms. And finally, if you are working, we would suggest to seek an occupational health review with work. This can help you with supporting a phased return or identifying any reasonable adjustments. Next slide, please. Brain fog is also another really common symptom, and it can also be a very worrying symptom for people, particularly if they've never experienced anything like this before. It can affect people's work and their relationships. It can range from mild, but it can also be quite severe in some cases, impacting everyday function. We're finding that people are benefiting from understanding a little bit more about what brain fog is and having an opportunity to hear and speak to other people, sort of getting that reassurance that maybe they're not alone with these symptoms as well. Looking at general principles such as sleep, nutrition and hydration is a really good place to start. It's suggested that a Mediterranean style diet, staying well hydrated and avoiding substances that can impact on the brain, such as maybe smoking or caffeine and alcohol, and also refined sugar, can help to support the brain and reduce the brain fog symptoms. Thinking back to fatigue management as well, it's important that we are pacing both our physical and our cognitive tasks. For example, sitting at the computer, it's also worth considering if you're resting your brain as well as your body when you do take a break. Perhaps maybe you're sitting and resting, but you're still scrolling on your phone or thinking about work. We would suggest sort of just considering that as well. We also know the impact of stress and anxiety on brain fog. We know that this can exacerbate the symptoms, particularly with things like language problems, such as word finding difficulties, which we know can be exacerbated by anxiety. Meditation and mindfulness can be really helpful to support with those factors. So reducing stress and anxiety, and also going back to thinking about resting your brain as well as your body in that time. So really thinking about using that time to your best ability. And finally, general cognitive strategies might also help to reduce the burden on the brain. For example, things like reducing distractions around you, trying to do one thing at a time, avoiding multitasking, planning in tasks to support with your organization, and writing things down to support your memory. Next slide, please. And in regards to emotional well-being as well, obviously we support people a lot with this side of things within our service. It may be that simply having someone to listen to you can be really helpful, but also we can offer a referral to the Talking Therapy Service in Hertfordshire, who offer lots of really good advice. And their website is also a really good port of call for further support and webinars and videos. Next slide, please. And I'll pass on to my colleague, Rituja.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Rituja, one of the specialist physiotherapists in the team, and I'll be talking about breathlessness, which is one of the commonest symptoms in long COVID. And once other causes have been ruled out, we assess the breathing pattern which includes like assessing various elements of breathing, like are they breathing through their mouth or their nose? Is their breathing shallow or deep? And are they engaging their diaphragm? Do they gasp or yawn often, etc.? Anxiety can also cause shortness of breath, perceived breathing difficulty, and hyperventilation. Shortness of breath can further worsen the anxiety, leading to a vicious cycle. Hyperventilation, in turn, allows the lungs to take in more oxygen and quickly transport it around the body, helping the body to prepare for the flight or fight response. In daily practice, rectangle breathing is proven beneficial to correct the breathing pattern disorder. This type of breathing encourages long exhalation to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which in turn activates the rest and digest mode. In the long COVID clinic, we teach breathing exercises that help to correct the breathing pattern disorder and to reduce the breathlessness. Next slide, please. Now, another common thing that some people experience is muscle or joint pain as a long COVID symptom, especially if they were in hospital or less active than usual while being unwell. Most of the pain should resolve in time, although some experiences for longer. If the pain is ongoing and it is limiting the usual activities, one might find themselves stuck in a cycle of pain and inactivity. If the pain symptoms are also accompanied by increased fatigue, it is important to practice pacing and finding a good balance between activity and rest to keep on top of the pain and fatigue. Okay, we move back to David.
Thank you, Vituja. Yeah, so coming on to more of the transition into Sarah now, and the work that Heart Sports Partnership are doing, a real specific management principle in line with this patient group is actually management of exercise and physical activity. And these 4 basic principles, in line with the management of those symptoms that we've just previously discussed, is a way to sort of move forward in terms of your recovery, move forward in terms of management of your everyday life, and return to normal. Start by sitting less and walking around the home little and often. If the main issue is breathlessness, then focus on different breathing techniques. If the main issue is fatigue, then look at pacing activities and keeping activity diary. And it is important not to overdo it, as this can cause a relapse in symptoms. These 4 principles provide that sort of core of building up gradually, not overdoing it, and looking at driving factors which cause issues, targeting breathlessness management and targeting fatigue management in long term. Next slide, please. So in terms of our provision in Hertfordshire, we've developed an exercise physical rehabilitation group, and this started in November 2023, following national guidance improvement and positive patient outcomes of benefits and symptom management through long COVID patient population in terms of exercise management. Our exercise program is an 8-week program focused on strength-based exercise prescription with aerobic activity management, fatigue and exercise tolerance. The program's now delivered on a rolling base cohort with a maximum wait time for the program of 6 weeks. Every patient referred to the program service is clinically assessed and risk assessed prior to consideration for the exercise. And the exercise program is now a fundamental part of our service provision in the core pathway. This program is delivered face-to-face at Bennetts End Community Centre based in Hemel Hempstead, and CRCH West Covent remains the only service in the East of England to develop its own in-house service provision within the NHS for physical rehabilitation for this patient group. Moving on to the next slide, there's been some really positive patient outcomes related to this patient group. So every patient, as I said before, receives exercise intervention is assessed by a submaximal exercise assessment, and for this we use an incremental shuttle walk test. This provides physiological capacity outcomes of METs and walking distance. Following the pilot group, we've instilled grip strength as a third outcome measure to assess a patient's strength both pre and post-program intervention. So far, we've had 30 patients started the program. There's one ongoing at the minute. 16 out of 18 patients completed the program with a minimum of 75% of the sessions attended, which is a really, really positive outcome considering this population of patient group. Only 2 patients were unable to complete the program. The average number of sessions attended was 6.6 out of the 8 sessions. And looking at the outcomes here, so the pre-METs, so for those that don't understand METs, so METs is a metabolic equivalent of task. So for example, when anyone sat down in everyday life, it equates to 1 MET. Every activity added to that is rated on a scale of that exertion and metabolic equivalent for that task. So the pre-assessment of patients on average was assessed at 6.78 METs. After the program, they were achieving 7.8 METs, which is a fantastic outcome. And it shows a clinically significant improvement with this patient group. More sort of specific as well in terms of everyday activity and improving just general physical activity and outcome was their pre-walking distance comparison to their post-walking distance. So pre-program, patients were achieving on average 520 meters. Post-program, patients were achieving 690. And it's a really clinically significant outcome, as a clinically significant improvement is only marked as 30 meters. So with this patient group and the application of this training and exercise prescription, we're achieving really beneficial outcomes, and patients are progressing through our pathway a lot and progressing with their recovery a lot faster than those patients not engaged with the exercise provision. So next slide, please. So why are we still talking about long COVID now? As I said at the start, so estimated 2 million people still living with self-reported long COVID symptoms in the UK, and a lot of people do not recognise their symptoms as a result of long COVID. So this number is likely to be much higher. Long COVID directly impacting day-to-day activities of 1.5 million people, and this highlights the importance of considering the impact of COVID during general consultations for healthcare professionals. So this leads me on nicely to what's out there in the community and how we've done some integrated work with Heart Sports Partnership based on our outcomes from our exercise program. So Sarah's going to tell you a little bit more about the good work they're doing in the community, but we have that flow of pathway for continued support with Heart Sports Partnership for our patients upon completion of their exercise program, to give them support, give them access to different groups, different exercise provisions, different activities and socialization to help further support their recovery and long-term management of their overall health. That concludes my part of the talk today, but I will be round and trying to answer any questions that everyone has. I'm going to pass you over to Sarah and Will, who's going to lead on the next part of the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Really insightful presentations there from David, Leah and Rituja. And there's also been some great questions that have come in already, and in fact, loads more just now. So I think instead of me fumbling through them now, I'll get my head through those, and I'll invite David, Rituja and Leah to have a quick look at those while we do our next presentation, and then we'll answer them live at the end of the webinar. So please do keep those questions coming in. We'll do our best to answer all of them. If we get too many, we will have to answer them off air, but let's see what we can do. And so without any further ado, I'll pass over to my colleague, Sarah, who's going to take us through the next section of the webinar. Sarah.
Thank you, Will. Hi everyone, my name's Sarah Keane and I am the long COVID lead for this project, and I'm acting as a physical activity coordinator at the moment with Heart Sports Partnership. I joined in January 2023 within the health team with Will, and so I'm going to give a bit of an update on the project that we've been doing so far around long COVID and physical activity. Next slide, please. So a bit about the project. Initially, it was a one-year feasibility project, which really good. It's been extended until March 2025, so next year. And the project's been funded by Public Health and Herts County Council. As David mentioned, we have been collaborating with the 2 long COVID services within Hertfordshire, with the main aim of the project is to sort of explore how the impact of physical activity can really aid that recovery of mild to moderate symptoms of long COVID. So we have a few different project objectives, if you like, which I've listed below. So the main one being sort of introducing that referral pathway from the long COVID services into community physical activity at a very low intensity, gentle sort of level. And to do that, we've done some mapping and assessing of different opportunities across the county. We've also been offering training to different physical activity providers in Hertfordshire where they might need a bit of an upskill and awareness of long COVID as a condition. One objective was to develop some physical activity opportunities in Hertfordshire where there might be some gaps in provision, which could be new or existing. But we did actually repurpose the funding for this sort of objective because there wasn't really any hotspots of participant referrals that came through, so that we wouldn't have been able to sort of produce a particular session run in a certain area. And there was lots of different opportunities already running in the county, which would have been still beneficial for people with long COVID. So this is sort of how we've managed to sort of extend that project into March 2025. We've been delivering some events similar to like this today, so sort of improve the knowledge and awareness of long COVID and how physical activity can be beneficial. And lastly, we have a great evaluation officer, Martin, who will be speaking in a little while, who's also been supporting us in creating a comprehensive evaluation framework for the project. So we can really get some insight and valuable learning from the project that we've been doing so far. Next slide, please. So this is kind of how the referral pathway has been looking since we launched the referral pathway in July, I think it was last year. So for example, if you did have suspected symptoms of long COVID, you'd initially go to a GP. And to diagnose long COVID, it's sort of a process of elimination. So you'd kind of want to rule out anything else that could be causing your symptoms. So you'd have a few tests done just to rule anything else out. But once those tests have sort of come back as, nothing else is causing the symptoms, then you can be referred to one of the two long COVID services in Hertfordshire. So there's one covering sort of the East and North Herts, and there's one covering the West Herts, which David, Leah and Rituja just spoke about. So at that point, you can, have the triage with clinicians there and get referred to the appropriate service based on your symptoms. And then in terms of coming into Heart Sports Partnership, into our service, David and then his team will refer to me once the patient's been discharged from the service following their 8-week exercise programme. And in the East and North of Hertfordshire, they sort of tend to refer to me whenever they feel is a beneficial point for their patient to start being physically active. They would then make that referral to me when it's safe and beneficial for them to do so. So once I have been referred to me, I'll tend to have a telephone-based triage with the participant, and that's to find out a bit more about them, their long COVID symptoms, and how I can best support them going forwards with sort of finding some physical activity for them. And at that point, we do some discussions and sort of it's a bit of a signposting service to sort of the, low intensity, gentle physical activity opportunities in Hertfordshire. And where necessary as well, I do try and sort of reach out to different providers in Hertfordshire when there might be a participant having their first attendance at a session, so they're very prepared for them to come along. And also that's a good point where I can offer the long COVID training, which I mentioned on the previous slide. So once they do start taking part in that physical activity provision in the community of Hertfordshire, we'll ensure that they've got regular contact with myself as physical activity coordinator, so we tend to do monthly check-ins. And that's one to make sure they're getting on okay, see how they're getting on, and we can then do any amendments and adaptations to the approach as and when is sort of necessary. And once a sort of patient or participant is very confident and sort of content with one, their physical activity participation, and two, how their long COVID symptoms are presenting, then it's up to them at that point to sort of end the contact with myself when they feel there's not really any necessary sort of point to have that contact anymore. They don't need my support anymore, and they can sort of just carry on with their own little schedule they've got going on. So that's sort of that in a nutshell, the referral pathway. Next slide, please, Will. So I thought I'd just bring a few sort of project insights that I've found so far as being the coordinator. So far in total, we've had 43 referrals made, and that was 30 from the East and North Hart service and 13 from the West Hart service. But numbers are still coming in now, so that's really fab. And out of that 43 number of referrals, there's 40 participants that are engaging with the evaluation. So that's obviously really beneficial for us to get as much learning as possible. We've had lots of phone calls made with participants, which is great. And nearly 90 providers registered for that long COVID training, which I mentioned. So it's really important that there is an upskill happening and people are sort of learning more about the condition and how they can best support people living with long COVID. and a massive number of 458 physical activities mapped across Hertfordshire. So there's normally something for everyone, and that is a very much continuous task. So it's not something we've just done at the start and, you know, stopped it there. We always try and carry on and find new activities for people, depending on their needs and what their interests are and what they're looking to do. In terms of there are lots of things that have been a facilitator and helped with the project and a few different challenges, but I've tried to pick out the main 3 for each. So a really important part of the project, which has helped me, is just really building that rapport with the NHS clinicians, so like David, Leah and Matuja, and obviously loads of others as well. It's been really important for me to learn more about long COVID and have those relationships with the clinicians, because they're the ones that have made the referrals, and it's that constant link between having that really patient-centric approach and really making sure there's always that link between myself, we're based more on the community, back to the NHS is really important for our patients. The evaluation support from Martin, our evaluation officer within Public Health Intelligence, has been really important as well. So like I said, that having that comprehensive framework in place has been just vital in making sure that we're actually finding some learnings from this and getting feedback from participants and really be able to follow their journey as they're taking part in physical activity, and just having that documentation in place. So having referral forms, triage forms and participant logs just means that there's always that smooth running of the project. It's a smooth project from when pathway from when the healthcare professional does that referral to when we have the initial phone call with the participant, and then we can keep that monthly log of how the participant's getting on throughout the time with us. Just in terms of main challenges, I think a couple of these were more towards the start of the project, when we launched around July last year. It was quite a slow process getting some referrals in, but I think that was more a case of, it was a new process that we were just still learning about. So to then implement that into the NHS teams, it was obviously a new learning curve and a new thing to trial out. So it took a while to implement that, but obviously 43 referrals now. So numbers really are creeping up, which is fab. And also participant engagement in physical activity is quite slow at the start. I think when a person's initially referred in, the thought of starting physical activity can be quite daunting and fearful for people, with the worry that they might relapse, and there's obviously been a prolonged amount of time they would have deconditioned, so just the thought of that can be quite daunting. So it's really important, as my role as well, to really give that encouragement and motivation and support and emotional well-being, like Leah mentioned earlier. It's really beneficial for that aspect as well. I think the final challenge really is just trying to juggle all the objectives at once for me. It's lots of spinning plates at once, if you like, but we're doing well so far, so it's all good. Next slide, please, Will. Okay, so we thought we'd share a bit of a lived experience case study with you today. So we have a couple that we're going to share on this webinar. And the first one is a gentleman called Sykes, and he was referred to us in the pathway in December last year. And he's going to share a bit about his long COVID journey so far with you all today.
Hi, my name is Sykes. In the years before COVID, while working as a train driver, I was a mathematician, musician, avid walker, and gym enthusiast. I suffer quite badly with asthma and am very cautious about getting ill, as this often leads to chest infections. When COVID broke out, I was extremely anxious about getting it after seeing those early shots of people in Italy dying in the hospitals. I avoided going indoors unless absolutely necessary, and avoided people until I had to attend a classroom event at work. 2 days later, in August 2022, I had the paramedics in my lounge and I was extremely sick with COVID. My oxygen level was at 89% and the paramedics told me this was normal for COVID. They said the fever would break in a day or two and I would be better a few days after that. My fever broke after 1 day, but I developed a persistent cough, an infected chest, and fatigue that just would not leave. For months, my condition did not improve, and I would struggle to walk even 50 meters at a time. I had severe brain fog and was unable to stand up for more than a minute or so. Not able to work, I could barely make it out of the house and relied heavily on my girlfriend to carry out the activities for daily living. Most of my relationships have suffered as I do not have the energy to meet up or chat on the phone. In the first few months, I could only manage around 1 call a day, and that was usually with a medical professional. This was in stark contrast to how I was before, when I used to start my day either by going to gym or studying towards my degree and then heading off to work, then coming home, working on some music or chatting on the phone, still with lots of energy. After about 5 months, I attended the NHS Long COVID clinic. Soon after, discharged back to my GP with a letter stating I had an underlying condition that was preventing me from recovering. At this point, I also started a very graduated phased return to work. It took quite a few months to get diagnosed with mild sleep apnea and receive a CPAP machine. This brought about a step change in my condition. Overnight, I was able to walk further and do more. It was at this point I re-engaged with the Long COVID team and soon after that attended my first exercise session. Experiencing Long COVID causes you to fear any kind of physical activity. Too often, the smallest amount of exertion causes a massive onset of fatigue that persists for days. After over a year of this, my body had become deconditioned. The class comprised of a set of remarkably easy exercises. We were encouraged to perform them at a pace where you could still hold a conversation but were still feeling the effects of the exercise. Anything more than that would likely cause an onset of symptoms. There was a warm-up, a lightweight training section, followed by an easier cardio section and a cool-down at the end. In the first class, I burned myself out in the first few minutes. It was a great feeling moving around, but it can quickly catch up with you. I was encouraged to slow down or use lighter weights. Between the exercises, I would sit on the floor where everyone else was able to stand. Completing the hour was exceedingly difficult at first, even with the light weights. My body ached for days after that. I always made sure I had the day off from work on these exercise days so I would not become too fatigued. By the end of the 8 weeks, I was able to complete the hour quite easily. I also knew how I could continue exercising on my own. It would have to be at a very sedate pace, but I knew what it should feel like now. I started doing the weights at home and walking on my days off. My symptoms improved on average. I did have some bumps along the way, as it is quite easy to overdo it. All it takes is a moderately stressful situation or to be too busy and my symptoms come back. Before I did the exercise group, I could walk around 400 meters in a day. After the 8 sessions, I could stretch that out to 2 kilometers on an exceptionally good day, although I would be too tired to do anything else after that. Now I'm able to work full-time again, which seemed impossible a few months ago. Unfortunately, it leaves me too tired to do anything else, and I've felt my health slip again. I am on a waiting list to work reduced hours, and I hope that once that happens, I will be able to have a better balance in my life and to be able to exercise more. My advice to anybody at the beginning of their long COVID journey is that you might not need to be as sick as you are. Getting stressed and pushing through things is the worst thing that you can do. Gingerly trying to keep moving and avoid becoming deconditioned, along with rest, is the very best thing you can do. Then, become as educated about the disease as you can from reliable sources. For example, get referred to a long COVID clinic and avoid what social media may have to say about it. Also, you may need to face some very hard truths. It may mean long-term significant changes to your health or to your job. It is very unpleasant to think about, but is something you will have to face.
So I'm going to pass over to Martin Logan now, who's our Senior Research and Evaluation Officer. He works for Public Health Evidence and Intelligence team within Herts County Council, and he's going to talk to us a bit today about the interim evaluation of the project so far. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone, on this wet and windy April day. I'm going to talk about the findings from the interim evaluation that we've been working on in a minute, but I'm going to just talk initially about how we got to this stage. So last summer, Sarah and Will and I sat down to talk about how to best evaluate this program of work. We decided to adopt a mixed methods approach. So we decided to use questionnaires, which were reporting and qualitative interviews to give us a holistic overview and understand the experiences of people with long COVID and their lived experiences. So initially what we did was we designed the questionnaires and piloted them with about a few long COVID participants. And then they were sent out to participants once they were on a kind of a physical activity program. So the questionnaires were used using validated measurements to look at the quality of life, symptom burden, things like pain, loneliness, and self-isolation. I think it's important to bear in mind that long COVID is a new phenomenon, really, and there's not much out there in terms of validated outcome measurements. So in a way, this is a feasibility approach. It's a pilot to see how it works. And the other thing to note as well is I did the analysis at the end of March. So the sample size is quite small, so none of the findings are statistically significant. It's just a flavor on what we found. And we are hoping by the end of the year to have larger numbers to actually have some meaningful results and statistics. Next slide, please, Will. So in terms of the age, most people were over the age of 45 who were on the program at the moment. And most of them are female. And 30% of the participants were from North Herts District, with one participant from each of the other districts mentioned. We were going to look at these figures and try and see can we improve our recruitment over time, but this is the numbers that we have for now. And next slide, please, Will. So we looked at the kind of short active lives survey from Sport England and the government, and we used that to try and measure the participants' activity levels. So what we found is the number of people who became active increased over the period that they were on the program. So at all points of the program, at least 60% of participants were active or fairly active, and these numbers went up on most of the things. So, I mean, there's different levels of measurement on the short active live survey, but generally there was an upward curve in terms of the number of people who were actually increasing their activity. Next slide, please, Will. So, I mean, I've used the University of Birmingham Medical School and long COVID symptom burden scale, which is a new kind of questionnaire, and it looks at things like shortness of breath, sleep, muscle and joint pain, fatigue, and brain fog and memory. But please bear in mind that these numbers, again, they're not significant because the sample size is quite small. So initially, people reported when they started the program that on the first follow-up that their shortness of breath had increased initially, but then on follow-ups 2 and 3 that actually reduced again. So there was a positive outcome there. And these were scored out of a possible 9 was the maximum score. In terms of sleep, I think most of the participants also had improved sleep and less sleep interruptions. And again, the scores were out of 12 here. So that was basically an improvement as well from that symptom. In terms of muscle and joint pain, the numbers were quite up and down. So initially at baseline, the number was at 6.94, and on the first follow-up, the number went up to 7.14, but then went down again to 6.53. So the numbers were kind of up and down. But I suppose when people are doing physical activity, there will be some muscle and joint pain in this population. In terms of fatigue, we found that again as well that the fatigue reading is actually reduced while people were on the program as well so far. And that was a very positive outcome. In terms of brain fog and memory, again, we saw a drop in the reporting of brain fog and memory in terms of how the symptoms worsened over time. And these were scored out of 9 as well until follow-up 3. Again, on follow-up 3, we had quite small numbers as well. So again, I would interpret these results with a bit of caution. And next slide, please. One area we wanted to focus on, actually, which is being looked at by the Office of National Statistics, is the effect that long COVID has on isolation and loneliness. And I think, as you can see from the pie charts here, quite a lot of people had reported some feeling of isolation and loneliness while they were on this program. And it's an area that we're quite interested in, that we're going to investigate further with the evaluation. As I said, I mean, this is early days yet. And I think when I did this evaluation report, we only had 32 people on the program, but hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a larger number and we'll be able to actually have more kind of like robust findings from the program. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Will.
Cool. So I'm happy to take the slide, Martin, if you like.
Go for it.
So just regarding some feedback within the survey that we sent out to participants monthly, we had 70% of participants, which is the majority, that were really satisfied with the programme, and nobody sort of rated dissatisfied with the programme, so that's really good. And here are just some keywords that people have fed back so far about the project. So it's all really positive, and we're really, really grateful for the engagement, and really grateful again for Martin and your support with the evaluation framework. It's been really, really beneficial so far. Will, if you could skip to the next slide, please. Okay, so we have got another case study, so hopefully this one might work. But again, if not, we will just again circulate the slides after the webinar today. So hopefully you can play that back after. And this is a lady called Karen, and she was in the same cohort as Sykes when she was referred from the West Heart service, and referred to me in December 2023. And yeah, she's going to share her long COVID journey, and hopefully this will play for you all. Hi everyone, we're really happy to say we have Karen with us today, and Karen is one of our participants in the long COVID referral sort of pathway, and she got referred to me in around Christmas last year, so we've been in contact since around January this year, I'd say, and she was referred from the Central London Community Healthcare NHS Trust long COVID service. Karen's obviously got some experience of, lived experience of long COVID, and has kindly said she'd be happy to give some insight into this today, so thank you so much, Karen, for sort of being here. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion and Q&A, and hopefully we'll find some learning from this as well. So thank you. I think a nice place to start would just be to sort of discuss when it first was you initially got long COVID symptoms and what they sort of look like for you, how they present.
Okay, so Christmas a couple of years ago, I got COVID, quite bad, not bad enough that I had to go to hospital, but sort of one step down from that, and found that the main effect was my breathing really got very difficult, and joint pain and stuff, which continued on for a long time after sort of all the other symptoms had sort of gone away. And after a couple of months of feeling like I wasn't really getting anywhere and struggling still to sort of even just do a flight of stairs without having, breathing issues, the GP sort of said it's possibly that it's a long COVID sort of thing that they're learning and dealing with at the moment. So tried a couple of different things just through the GP, and then eventually went back again because I hadn't improved massively. And they referred me to the long COVID team, which was really nice because someone phoned me up and spoke to me about it, and they felt like for the first time someone actually understood the issues and problems that I had. So that was really nice, because you start questioning yourself at the beginning of, what's wrong with you. And so they were really good, and I went in to see the long COVID team. They said that I had issues with sort of my lung capacity, because a lot of people they found with long COVID would only use the top half of their lungs, not the whole lot. So they would give me some breathing exercises, etc. Which I'm still working on now, because it's, and to say that it is a slow sort of recovery period, I still sort of assumed within a month or two I'd be back up and running to where I was before, but it's not been the case.
A longer journey than you think.
yeah, definitely longer than I anticipated.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
The sort of start was,
Yeah, and so how would you say that it's impacted your life, or so far, or what sort of changes and adaptations have you had to sort of face since you've been with long COVID?
I mean, originally massively, I couldn't go back to work. Literally just walking to the car would be an effort. I mean, I have a reasonably physical job because I work with special needs children, and I just couldn't do any of the sort of running around parts. So I reduced my hours at work because I couldn't manage. By the afternoon I'd be tired and want to have a rest. So things like that really impacted. Beforehand I used to be reasonably sporty and did sort of karate and swimming and stuff, and I couldn't do any of that to start with. Went back to still haven't gone back to karate now, but swimming I've started doing occasionally, and
good.
getting a bit better with that. Walking, because I've got a dog, I can now walk on the flat for ages, and that's fine. Whereas before, walking around the block, I'd become breathless. Now I'm fine. I could walk for a long time until I try and up level, and sort of like steep hills or really brisk walking is still an issue that I'm sort of working on at present.
Yeah. It's nice to notice the little sort of improvements though, of sort of reflecting as how it was at the start to noticing the little changes that you can do a little bit more now. So that's really good. But how was it sort of initially sort of trying to realise that, you know, life is a little bit different now, and how did it feel for you not being able to sort of do full-time hours at work and, you know, be physically active and do sort of your
very
hobbies?
frustrating, and you sort of think, is it just me? You know, whereas joining the long COVID group, you get to realise that there is lots of people that are sort of in the same situation as you, and it makes you feel not so alone, because at first you sort of really do. And also I think you start worrying, thinking, well, it's been a couple of months, why am I not better at work? And I start going, oh, why are you not better yet, sort of thing, you know. Should all be back to normal by now. If you were ill normally, you'd be back up and sort of running by now.
Yeah. And so you kind of touched a little bit on sort of the exercise program that you took part in the long COVID service. Tell me a bit more about how that was for you, the experience sort of through weeks 1 to 8, and how you are compared to now to the start.
That's it. I sort of trying to do exercise sort of and breathing stuff before I got onto that on your own, I find quite difficult, and it's hard to get motivated, especially when you've been out of it for so long. So then to be able to go to an 8-week course was really nice, having people on the same level as yourself, because I didn't want to go to classes or gym stuff. I just wouldn't be able to manage a whole class like that, because I'm just not at that level. So to be able to then go somewhere and they've sort of pitched at the same, it's good. And they also, the instructors know where you're at, so they can pitch that at the right level, so you don't feel like you know, it's just too much. And actually it's achievable, so that's good. And seeing each week you can try and gradually improve a bit, and then they give you the exercises that you can then, once you've done it for a couple of weeks, start trying to do some during the week at home as well. And so that's quite good.
Yeah, I can imagine it was just nice to feel kind of safe, that it's guided and monitored, and they know it's the right level for you, sort of each participant in the class as well. And you sort of touch on the social side as well. Do you say that sort of had a nice impact on you too?
Definitely, yeah, because I've done a couple of things on Zoom and that, which is nice, but it's not quite the same. It's nice to be in a class with people sort of that have been in similar situations to yourself, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say, obviously, the physical activity, would you say it sort of helped? Like, have you noticed any slight improvements or changes to symptoms since sort of starting it and coming out the other side?
Definitely felt sort of more confident doing stuff, sort of physically, sort of walking and doing stuff a bit more, and trying to sort of push yourself a little bit more with doing stuff. So I definitely think it has improved, not massively, but definitely a bit.
By process, but that's good. Little wins, take the little wins. It's always good to sort of recognise that.
And I think I've had to come to terms with that fact, I think, as well, is that it's, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day type thing. It is going to take a long time, and at least it's going the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. You're on a good course at the moment, so that's really good. And would you say you've sort of found any other sort of management techniques that you've either learned through the service, or that you found just doing in your life that maybe not related to physical activity, but any other sort of techniques that have helped you?
The service has been really good, and it gives you things. It isn't just about the physical things. Mentally, they've, you know, there's well-being sort of courses you can go on with, sort of relaxation techniques or different mindfulness things, which is really good. Some of the breathing techniques are quite good to try and use to try and help with sort of lung capacity and stuff. So there's definitely been a few other bits on there which have been really useful and that really helpful.
Oh, good. And I guess maybe just lastly, have you got any sort of maybe top 3 tips or any advice you'd give to someone maybe at the start of their long COVID journey, that you sort of wish you either knew, or that you would sort of, from being on your journey so far, that you would like to share with people that might be in sort of your situation?
Yeah, definitely don't do it on your own. I think it's really hard to try and do things on your own. And so take the things from the services and use them, because they are, even if it's not like the mindfulness things or things like that, I would have before gone, oh, no, I'm not, you know, that's not me. But I think have an open mind and try out all these different things, because some of them you might find actually are really helpful and useful.
Mm.
And also remember, it is a slow journey. That's one thing it took me a while to sort of appreciate, is don't get too frustrated if the sort of wins are small to start with. As long as you're going in the right direction, that's the main thing. And you can't rush these things, unfortunately. But as long as you keep going and don't get disheartened by that, I think you'll win in the end.
Yeah. And I guess I know you're still on your journey now, but where do you feel you are at sort of from the start to now? Where do you feel the changes have been made, and how far do you think you are to sort of getting where you might want to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably 2/3 of the way there now, really, sort of.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to get halfway, and then I felt like I sort of plateaued for a while, and now I'm feeling
Yeah.
like, right, okay, I've got to start now trying to move forward, push myself a bit more maybe, and do a few more things. Yeah, and hopefully it will slowly but surely get there.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. It's been really nice to have a bit of insight into sort of your journey of long COVID so far. So thank you just so much for popping on and sharing that with us. So that was Karen. She's lovely. And I'd say with Sykes' slide, I did pop a few little key takeaways beforehand as well. And she is in the process of being sort of referred to and starting an exercise referral scheme at her local leisure centre. And she's got a really great mindset and is really good to get started with that. So that's really positive. Just regarding some participant feedback we've had so far, I won't obviously read through this whole slide, but just some key points on there which you can obviously read through when the slides get circulated. But just to pull out a couple of nice key points, I think everyone so far that has fed most stuff back they're just really grateful for the opportunity to sort of have this signposting service, and it's facilitated lots of opportunities for them, and opportunities they wouldn't have known about without sort of this service in place. And a lot of people, like I said before, really get a lot out of the emotional support of the service as well. So the top right quote, getting the understanding, the realism and empathy shown to the participants, get the emotional support, but also with the physical support as well. So it's really trying to target all areas and making sure that it's that safe space, that people feel comfortable to talk to me and feel like they trust me to find those activities that are going to be beneficial for them as well. But yes, really great feedback so far. So it's all really positive, and spurs us on to keep carrying on with the project, which is great. Just to touch on one of the objectives mentioned at the start, we are still rolling out the funded long COVID training. So just talk a bit about it quickly. It's an online sort of learning course with a company called Future Fit around COVID-19 rehab, where you can essentially learn how to support clients who have COVID-19 or long COVID, and really build up your awareness of the condition and sort of the best strategies to help aid that recovery. It is more beneficial for people who are a physical activity provider. So if anyone's on the call today who does sort of deliver in the community of Hertfordshire, then this probably is really beneficial for you to think about. I popped the 5 key modules there for you. So there is one particular module around long COVID, and they take about 45 minutes to an hour to complete. It is SIMSA recognised and it is fully funded by the project, so free for you guys to access. I think it's £40 normally per person if you just want to access it. So if you do it through us, you can get it for free, which is also a bonus. And just to access the course, you have to just be a provider in Hertfordshire delivering physical activity. And then you can literally access the training if you just register your interest. So we have popped how to access the training in the little box on the right hand side. And so when we circulate the slides later, feel free to click on those links to register your interest if you did want to take up the training. But just to know, the training is only available until the end of May this year. So I think you've got just under 2 months to complete it, but still plenty of time given it's about 5 hours max sort of content to take on. And we've had really great feedback again from the training that people have sort of undertaken so far. So definitely want to recommend for you or anyone that you might know who'd be interested. Next slide, please, Will. And just to wrap it up for sort of the future of the project and the remainder of this year, like I mentioned, the training for long COVID will be available until the end of next month. And the project referral pathway with the evaluation process will continue and remain live for the rest of this year, so for 2024. And we will be delivering another event similar to today, sort of around the project and around long COVID, before the project ends next year in 2025 of March. So we'll just confirm that date nearer the time and obviously reach out to you guys if you're still interested in coming along to something similar. But I'm more than happy if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop me an email. I've popped it at the bottom of the screen there. That can be about the project. or about anything we mentioned today in the call. I'm happy to carry on discussing anything. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. And I think that brings us to an end. Will.
I'm on mute. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. That does bring us to the end of our presentations. We have had so many questions come in. This is the most questions we've ever had, I think, in a webinar that I've delivered with HSP, which obviously shows there's lots of energy around the topic. Can I invite all of our speakers to come back into view? We're going to do our best to get through as many of these as we can. I can't speak for my colleagues. Colleagues, if you need to drop off, then please do, but we'll keep going as long as we can. And this recording will obviously be circulated if anyone does need to leave, because I know we said we would finish by 15:15. So I'm going to jump straight in, and I'll invite any of our panel colleagues to jump in with answers. I wanted to try and add some kind of strategy as to how I approach these, but I'm just going to go with the ones that came in first because there's so many of them. So David has asked, I'm 4 years into long COVID with no end in sight. How might I be signposted to the services that David's presentation describes?
Sure, and I think this will cover a lot of questions within the Q&A looking through. So David, and this goes for all services across Hertfordshire and West Essex within our commissioning ICB. Referral pathways are through primary care for your independent GP, and they should refer into our service. There are a number of prerequisites because long COVID continues to be a diagnosis by exclusion. So you need a couple of simple investigations that need to be completed to give that clinical indication that it is in fact long COVID that you're experiencing. So that they're simple tests like a simple blood test, ECG, and maybe a couple of others dependent on your presenting symptoms. But simple answer, go to your GP, talk about long COVID and how you feel this might be a symptom that you're suffering, and request referral to your local long COVID service. And there's a very good service, not just us in West Hertfordshire. There's a very, very good service up in East and North Hertfordshire and over in West Essex. So please do go via your GP.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. I'm going to move straight on to the next question. So an anonymous member has asked the term people with long COVID. So does this also mean that someone will continually have the virus, or is it just the side effects?
Yeah, so it's not just you don't just constantly have COVID. Long COVID is almost an entity and long-term management of a chronic condition in itself. Because it's still so new, like a lot of health conditions that occur, it's as a result of research, as a result of explanation. So these findings are ongoing. Even it was quite ironic. We were talking about it before the call today. Those that might have seen BBC News last night, they decided to talk about a recent piece of research surrounding certain proteins that impact inflammation within the blood that have been found in long COVID patients. This is ongoing research. That's a very small group of only 650 people that research took place with. So you're talking about 2 million people all round sort of impacted by long COVID. So lots more research has to be done. But just to go back to the initial simple answer question, it doesn't mean you continually have COVID-19 as an acute infection. It just means you have long COVID as a chronic long-term condition.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm worried I don't want to direct all of these at you, David, but keep answering as long as you're happy to. Katie has asked, how do you manage the risk of PEM in initial assessments of the exercise program?
Sure. So PEM is post-exercise malaise, for those generally that don't know. So typically it is that exacerbation of severe fatigue and exhaustion post-exercise or post any form of activity where you're exerting yourself. Post-exercise is prevalent within the long COVID patient population. And in terms of our exercise assessment, this is part of our core sort of prerequisite to allow us to provide appropriate exercise prescription. The exercise assessment is at a much higher level than what our exercise prescription is delivered at, both through the strength training and the aerobic training approach. Patients are significantly sort of informed you will probably have an exacerbation, or it might trigger an acute reaction of fatigue or that post-exercise malaise as a result of the exercise assessment. But not all patients have, but some have had that response. But knowing and having that security and understanding that having this advice from healthcare professionals, it's a secure, safe environment, and the prescription isn't based at that level. They're not going to feel like that every week as a result of just conducting the exercise. So it is sometimes a normal acute response with the patients, but it's overall part of growing their confidence and their long-term management of activity back into their routine.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to keep rattling them off. So Anna has asked, for those of us who passed through the long COVID clinic pre-November 2022, is the exercise program available to us? And if so, how would we access it? And have your results been compared with the Nuffield Health's similar plan?
I'll answer the bottom one first. So
Yeah.
quickly, no, we can't share data across different healthcare agencies. So our data hasn't been compared to Nuffield Health's, but I am aware of their provision that is more sort of leisure centre, community-based, individual-based approach, not as a group-based provision. But there is comparisons to be made. And this is where we took a little bit longer sort of developing our exercise provision within the NHS and within our service. So it's a lot more fundamentally evidence-based and formulated from those core provisions within the NHS of pulmonary rehabilitation and cardiac rehabilitation, and using shared learning across those services to apply with long COVID. In terms of, for those that have perhaps been discharged from our service back in November 2022 or pre-November 2022, you can re-access the service. You can go again via your primary care GP, say your awareness of the provision change within the service, and you are still suffering with your long-term management, and actually the provision might be worth touching in again. The referral pathway is there. We'd be happy to accept that referral in for the exercise program, and then further signposting on to Heart Sports Partnership for that long-term management.
Brilliant. And I know, yeah, and Sarah does have the Nuffield program in her suite of activities that she moves people into. So it might be that someone ends up doing both, if that's what their pathway takes them down. Brilliant. Kate has asked, what is the referral process into the CLCH long COVID service? I think we've sort of covered that, but I think she's having particular troubles attempting to see a GP to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's really challenging. And I won't beat around the bush with this. Like I said, it's the awareness of long COVID among healthcare professionals, but also general sort of society. And it's part of our challenge as long COVID services to raise that awareness, doing webinars such like today to medical professionals, but also to general population. All I'd say is try to keep banging on that door with your primary care GP, and almost got to a point where I'm sure by the sounds of it, Kate, you've got to a point where you want that referral and almost demand that referral. Your GP cannot decline that referral to the service, considering those prior investigations have been made. You've had your blood test, you've had your single ECG, you've had those exclusions. It almost indicates that clinically, but it's very difficult to say patient case to case, but definitely keep banging that door with primary care and with the GP.
Brilliant. I'm going to give you a 5-second break here, David, because there's a question for someone else. So this one's actually for myself and Sarah. Sarah, I'll do my best and you can come in if I'm wrong. Who's asked if we refer to any Bedfordshire services. So that will be through our pathway once they've been through David's service and in with us. As the Heart Sport and Physical Activity Partnership, we do focus on Hertfordshire. However, we do have really strong partners in other active partnerships across borders and across the country. The programme is also funded by Herts County Council Public Health Service, so we do obviously focus on Hertfordshire. However, we do also know that if someone lives on the border of Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, then they're not going to hit a wall when they get to the county boundary. So we'd absolutely do the research and find out all the local activities close to that person. And if that happens to be across the border in another county, then we'd absolutely refer into that service. Because it's, like we say, no one's drawing a line and stopping people crossing over. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we would and do, and not just Bedfordshire, across into Essex, across into Bucks and down into North London as well. Sarah, would you add anything to that, or if we, is that?
No, smashed it. That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Okay, so I think this might be coming back to you, David, but you can decide. Tim has asked, the physical activity approach seems to have a focus on strength. Given the management principles did not talk about strength training, how did this focus come about, and to what extent has the focus on strength exercises been beneficial?
Sure, and apologies for, limited time. We can't go into every prescription in great detail, but yes, there is a real focus around strength-based training application with this patient group, and it's due to their presentation and symptom management. Typically, a long COVID patient, because of their history, is in a deconditioned state. And we know from evidence-based practice going by with other management of long-term conditions through hospitalization patients, that deconditioning and actually strength-based training approach has significant benefits to the efficiency of how that muscle mass is working, gaining muscle mass again post-program, post-admission, and beginning to increase their activity. In simplistic terms, and the application with strength training, we can break it down a lot easier in terms of the professional and clinical use. We can break down tasks dependent on patient need and equality. So, for example, I think covering another question that's in the chat somewhere, our incremental shuttle walk outcome seemed quite high at around 500 as a baseline. That's not a true representation. They're not all working at sort of 500 meters pre-program. I think the lowest someone's walked is 30 meters as a pre-course assessment. They improved by 200 meters based on the exercise provision that they received. It's about tailoring to individual needs as part of the program. And through strength training, you're able to do that a lot more. Whereas aerobic is aerobic, it comes in any form, whether it's walking, cycling, running, depends on your level of application. And it's probably worth mentioning at this point, thinking about exercise professionals and raising awareness, it's application of the FIT principle that we all use in everyday practice, thinking about frequency, intensity, time, and type. With this long COVID patient group, we focus on two progressions within that. We focus on frequency and we focus on time. We don't focus on intensity at all, because we know that exacerbation, that post-exercise malaise, that extreme management of breathlessness and fatigue will be triggered at those higher levels of exertion. So it is that light to moderate intensity, improving the efficiency of how that musculoskeletal system's working in coordination with the cardiovascular system.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm wary of time, but I'm kind of scrolling down the questions, and we'll try and still get through as many as we can. Martin, I've got to the section where you were talking, so I'll have a couple of questions for you. Marie has asked, how did you measure loneliness and isolation?
We use the ONS scoring system for that, which is influenced by the University UCLA scores. So you can find those online on the Office of National Statistics webpage.
Brilliant. And Anita has also said, this is more of an ask, but would it be possible to share references for the questionnaires you used for evaluation?
Yeah, I can do that. That's no problem.
Brilliant. So Anita, maybe if you pop Sarah an email, which will be on the slides, and then we can arrange for connection to Martin.
Yep.
I'll fly through some others. These aren't specifically for you, actually. But Pam has asked, can we have links for the tools that we've used for activity and long COVID symptoms? We can absolutely share everything that we're using there. Claire Ewins, hi Claire, has asked, I think I can answer this one. Can we add long COVID to the long-term conditions which can be referred in for everyone active NHS exercise referrals? Moving medicine is working really well for those with Parkinson's across the everyone active centres in Herts, and could we have a similar campaign for those diagnosed with long COVID, which could be driven by our NHS social prescribers? A great question and a great point, and I can't speak for the different providers, but I know long COVID is absolutely a referral point for some of the exercise referral programs across the county. I can't speak specifically for everyone active without looking it up. But if it's not, that's definitely it's definitely conversations we can have. And I think I'd be surprised if they're either already not accepting referrals based on long COVID, or if they're not having those conversations. But we can pick that conversation up off of the event. So Chris Lloyd has asked, what do we need to do to keep the programme going beyond March 2025? Should we link to other related things like chronic fatigue? Yes, absolutely. So this is a feasibility study. So we're essentially trying to prove that there is a correlation between all the work that once someone has come through the NHS pathway into Sarah's work, and that they carried on to improve their symptoms. If through all the fantastic work that Martin's doing, we can evidence that that impact, then we'll be taking that impact back to the funders to say, can we continue this work, because it's clearly having really positive outcomes. I know that colleagues in other counties, Norfolk, for example, active partnership there, started off on a similar pathway for long COVID and have expanded it to other conditions now, such as severe mental illness and different other long-term conditions that will affect someone's wider life, but that gentle physical activity might be beneficial for. So yeah, absolutely, we hope it won't be the end of the journey in March 2025, but it'll be the end of the first stage of the journey. But time will tell on that. Chris has also asked what's happening in other counties. This work is happening around England in different areas. Not exactly the same. We have decided this is the best approach for Hertfordshire. We've had some comments from people in other counties as well, saying that they've got different bits and pieces going on in their areas. So I would advise either speaking to your, if you're looking elsewhere than Hertfordshire, speak to your local active partnership, and we can connect you in if you're not sure who that is, or your local NHS services. We've had an anonymous member, how do we refer into the service? So if you're talking about David's service, we've covered that off already through the GP. If we're talking about Sarah's service, then that is, it's the same response, but you start off within the NHS service, and then the referrals are passed through to Sarah. Sarah obviously isn't a clinician, so she isn't clinically able to diagnose and recommend, but she can work with a patient that's come with that clinical referral from the NHS side of things. So that's the way to get involved into the services. Oh, there's still so many questions. I think we'll just do a couple more, and anyone that we don't get to, we'll have to answer off of the event. This is an interesting one from Camille. Are there any similar exercise programs for children with long COVID? Do we know of anything that's working with children and young people that might have long COVID?
Yeah, I mean, nationally, in a lot of the data shows a lot of children or young below the age of 16. There isn't a large population of children being impacted by long COVID. They tend to be a resilient bunch, these children, so they tend to recover quite well. There is a specialist long COVID service that was running, but is now stopped up at in Cambridgeshire, Addenbrooke's. But the application would still be the same in terms of sort of recovery. There's also a specialist assessment centre based at UCL in London, which does cater for the younger population as well. Unfortunately, I know here in Hertfordshire, we are only adult-based services, so we'll only take patients sort of 18 plus, maybe 17 if they're approaching 18, etc. There's just a poor diagnosis of children with long COVID. And unfortunately that does go down the avenue again. I know I keep saying it, but with primary care, with GPs, trying to get them into the right services.
Thank you very much. I'll move straight on. So this one, I think I can answer. Claire Hayward has asked, is there a plan to expand the programme that is run in Hemel Hempstead to open the east of the county, given that referrals to HSP from the east and north Herts vastly outstrip those from West Herts? So what's quite a nice thing with the programme that Sarah's doing is that we do have different approaches from our two NHS partnerships in the east and north and in the south and west. And the east and north don't have the in-house physical activity programme, but someone might come to Sarah earlier in their pathway to get involved with something like the Nuffield Health programme that someone mentioned previously. So there aren't any plans to expand that at the moment. purely based. It's two different partnerships with two different funding processes and approaches to everything that they deliver. However, what we'd love to happen is at the back of this program, all the evaluation that Martin does can have a really good comparison between the two approaches, and we might be able to see what differences are created from having one in-house, one not in-house, and then make recommendations going forward. Is that fair to say, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning as well, as sort of clinical healthcare professionals, we can refer, if a patient isn't on our exercise program and doesn't want consent to referral to Heart Sports Partnership, there are different sort of activity and exercise prescription pathways we can refer into, much like GP exercise referral schemes, etc. So that wasn't really captured in part of our provision, but numbers are building. To Sarah, as she said, I think even since these slides are put together, she's had a few more in her inbox come through. So those numbers are growing from West Hertfordshire into Heart Sports Partnership all the time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've had lots of other questions about referring in, which I hope have been answered from the questions we've already asked. If anyone feels like we haven't answered that, then please do get in touch and we can follow up through email. There's also been quite a lot of questions about services outside of Hertfordshire, which I'm not going to attempt to answer live now, but if anyone does have any further questions around that, please again do get in touch and we can connect with colleagues that are working outside of Hertfordshire who will be able to confidently speak about those services a little better. One member of the webinar was asked, how does this link with the NICE guidelines where graded exercise is not recommended? Sorry, I'm not sure if I've said that right.
No, that's okay. It's very vague, like a lot of NICE guidance, if I'm honest with you. Hence why there tends to be a lot of questions around it. Those guidelines, as I said, much with the outline of what long COVID did, were designed back in 2021. So our understanding of long COVID, and they are due an update this year in terms of NICE guidance and activity management. But what I will say, they were based purely on aerobic activity, not focused on a particular training-based routine. So that's why they just referred to it as a graded based activity. There was no designated training principles around it. As sort of our understanding of long COVID has evolved, so has our understanding of how to manage rehabilitation, whether that both be physical, psychological, etc. So yeah, they're definitely due an update. But yeah, I'd say sort of it's very vague, those NICE guidance, and there's a lot newer research and publication through now from the British Medical Journal, for example, posted something just in February with good outcomes relating to aerobic based training, but strength training based as its main principle.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And I'm just going through, we've still got around 8 or 9 unanswered questions, but I think what's going to be best to do is if we will take these offline and come back to you. So if we haven't come to you, first of all, check that we haven't typed an answer to you already, because some people have had typed answers. But if not, we will endeavour to get back to everyone. I'm wary that we've just hit the hour-and-a-half mark, and people will be wanting to get off to their lunch. So I think we'll draw a line there, but we will come back to people that haven't had their questions answered. So thank you very much, everyone. And all that really leads me to do is to extend a huge thank you to everyone that's taken part in the webinar today. So for David, to Martin, to Sarah, Rituja, and to Leah, really, really insightful. And I know there's been a lot of interest. I mean, like it's just on the level of questioning that's come in there, but we need to build in another half an hour on the next one for all the questions that come in. But also the interest this has drawn in from outside of Hertfordshire. Clearly, there's lots of people coming to learn about the great work that's happening in Hertfordshire. So thank you very much for everyone that's taken part. And also thank you for everyone that's come to watch. Please do fill in the survey as it pops up when you leave the room. And if there's anything that you're still wondering about, please do get in touch with Sarah. Use her as the operator to talk to all the other members of staff that have spoken today, because she'll be able to connect you in with any further questions that you might have. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll speak to you again soon.